You know, it looks like this still has to get sorted out because, you know, I talk up alternative media, the internet, and the things that you and I have been doing as being a great alternative. We're making great progress, so we have an audience out there. And yet, if you look at the news in the last month, you know, a year ago, our efforts to tone down the war and not expand the war was doing quite well. But here, just recently, with some of the killings and the events and the description of ISIS, all of a sudden there was a tremendous shift, which means that the conventional media seems to have worked its will just as they did prior to the time of going into Iraq. Remember, it took a year or so to get the people behind it, and this seems to operate rather quickly. But then we still have the alternative media over there. There's still a group of people out there that want to know the truth. This is a tough battle. We have been making progress, but how tough is it? Any idea about who's having the greatest influence and how this thing may pan out?
Well, a couple of thoughts on that. First of all, you're absolutely right in what you're describing. I mean, if you go back 1 year ago to this push for the U.S. to go into Syria and to overthrow Assad, as we overthrew Gaddafi in Libya, as we overthrew Hussein in Iraq, when we see this happening, a year ago, the American public overwhelmingly rejected that idea. And that was an enormous victory for the alternative media and for new media, because the old media continue to respond the same way they always have. Now, to your point about ISIS, what's different here is that with ISIS, there is this fear, the propaganda of fear, that was much more and is much more successful than what we saw in Syria. Because at the end of the day, regardless of where Americans fell on the issue of Syria, virtually no one was afraid of Assad over here. But the fear of ISIS and the images of ISIS cutting off journalists' heads and the images of ISIS, you know, slaughtering Christians in Iraq and Syria is enough that people have these archetypes, I think, built into their minds, and they automatically fall back and default to those archetypes and say, well, wait a minute. Okay, we shouldn't be involved everywhere in the world, but this time and on this occasion, now we've got to go back and we've got to do something again. And because you have no difference, you know, that left-right paradigm in media, on the left or on the right, it doesn't matter where media pretends to fall, they're all pushing for the same thing. Intervention, go into Iraq. The United States has a responsibility.
And it seems like it's difficult under these circumstances where there's so much emotion for reason to prevail. Because when you sit down and think about it, you know, there's a lot of governments over there that we don't like Assad. But now it looks like we're shifting and we're going to be on the side of Assad, but we can't admit it. And the same way with Iran. But it seems like logic just doesn't want to break through at times. But I don't see any alternative for us, you and the many others who are trying to make an effort to get the truth out, is to try to persuade people. And it's sad to me to think that after all these decades that people wouldn't say, and why aren't they thinking like they did last summer? And I think you've explained it pretty well. The emotions are just driven by this, and facts don't mean a whole lot. Ben, what specifically are you working on now to try to expose? Is there one issue that you're doing more work on than others? Any of the commissions and reports that have been out there that you're trying to let the people know about?
Well, one thing we're really working on right now, as I mentioned in the beginning, we have two reports we're pushing. One actually is complete, and so we'll be releasing a video next week specifically about cannabis and CBD oil and explaining to people not just what it is, but here's the real threat that it faces in our government system. And I think people are going to be very surprised to see, while, you know, government is saying one thing, their actions on the other side of that issue are polar opposite. And so we hope to expose that and really continue to develop that. But in addition to that, we really are working right now to create a piece that will demonstrate to people the truth about where ISIS came from. You were talking about the fear issue, and that's what we've been talking about today. It is a significant issue. And I think if we do not show people that this is where ISIS comes from, it is not inaction that created ISIS. And that's what media and politicians are telling us over and over and over, is that if we made any mistake, it was inaction. and that's not true. It was direct action by this government in funding so-called rebels in Syria, in funding these groups along the Iraq-Syria border in order to overthrow Assad that created this in the first place. And beyond just journalism, I think this is one of the most important stories that we can share with folks, because as you know, history just continues to repeat itself. And unless we show people, step back from the emotion and think about sensibly what's happened here, we're doomed to keep making these same mistakes.
We're going to finish up shortly here, but I want to thank you very much for being with us today, and I love the fact that you're participating in Voices of Liberty, and that just gets more information out to more people, so we appreciate that very much. But I wanted to ask a little bit different question. It's not so much philosophic, but it's more social. You've been in the media, and I know you've met a lot of people, and sometimes I get to ask a similar question to this. How do you react and treat, and how did you get along with those other politicians? But do you have contacts now with the people that worked in the ordinary media, and what is the relationship there? Is there anything interesting about your relationships before and now with those who are working in the conventional media field?
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, my relationship, I think, is a complicated one, as I'm sure you understand. Simply because here's the response I get from so many people who are in media who I do stay in touch with. They look at what I'm doing and they say, Ben, you're an enormously talented journalist. We love what you're doing, but there's always the but, right? But why are you talking about this? Or why is this issue so important? Or, you know, it's great that you're doing this, but should you really be talking about this issue? And the word that they use a lot with my work is you're a little too conspiratorial. And what's sad to me about that is that if you go and look at the body of our work, there's nothing conspiratorial about anything that we do. But because we're willing to question things, even as a journalist, I think your highest calling is to be the most critical mind in the room, right? The calling is to be so critical of what people are saying, of what politicians say, of what leaders say. And yet you're treated now as if you're a kook because you question things. Instead, we've actually adopted a belief that a reporter is just a repeater. Just repeat whatever you're told, and if you don't do that, then there's something wrong with you. So it's a difficult process in terms of that relationship, just because they don't understand it. And I don't know one single journalist right now who I talk to on a regular basis who understands why we're doing the stories we're doing. The attitude is, why don't you just do something, same style, same professionalism, same ability, but just talk about other subjects.
I thought what they'd probably say to you is you're not getting the morning memo. You haven't gotten your directions from the higher ups. But anyway, I want to thank you once again for being with us, and I want to thank our audience for tuning in today. It's been a great interview, and Ben has been doing a great job, and I'm sure that all of you will be back to the network soon. Thank you for tuning in today.